Well, good morning, everybody. As Bruce mentioned, this is a panel on AI plus IP equals ROI. And we're going to continue some of the important themes which Alison mentioned in her keynote. We're going to discuss how AI and IP together can help create, evaluate, and extract value. And we have a great panel. Today we have to my left Phil Hartstein, who is managing partner at Sorin IP Capital, who brings an investor's perspective. His work sits at the intersection of IP capital and decision making at scale. To his left is Tony Trippe, and he serves as manager of AI initiatives and IP strategy at Owens Corning, and he's also the founder of Pat Informatics, a leading voice in patent analytics and how organizations use data to make better technology decisions. Last but not least, we have Dan Brown, a professor at Northwestern University with over 100 patents from the US and overseas. And he has deep experience in product development and design innovation. So welcome to all of you. Let's start with the broad theme here of AI as a transformation lever. And Phil, how has AI actually changed the way that we evaluate and invest in IP?
Wow, yeah, big question, and first of all, really great to be here. It's a fantastic organization. I did a lot of research on this. I'm really interested in this kind of stuff. Cozy, I mean, I spent some time in Lucasfilm and understanding educational and STEM. So, Bruce, compliments for finding this organization or this organization finding you. Fantastic again to be here. I actually learned a lot from Alison too. Where did Alison go? So I met Alison several years ago. But man, I am not a developer. I do not speak the language of large language models. I am instead a consumer of the technology. And I think the realization for me is the democratization that it creates for your ability to interact with information at scale requires you to engage in it, to understand it. My journey took me several years before I was willing to jump in. But on Friday, for example, and for those that don't know me by background, I used to run a public licensing business. And when I started that job as a nonlinear thinker, I did a lot of hand and very manual analysis. I needed to understand markets. I needed to understand players. I needed to have an eye for what private equity was going to do in terms of consolidating the industry. And that's even before I get to the patents themselves, the intellectual property that underlies, the innovation and the technology. It took me months to do that 10 years ago. And for the last 6 months, I've been developing our own internal tools. I think Alison will be happy to know that we are focused on 3 things within our business that we are trying to accelerate and using AI for. And on Friday, for example, I ran and developed, as part of our investment thesis process in an investment fund, an entire patent strategy, very similar and equivalently sized and scaled to what took me months to do 10 years ago. And I did it on Friday. And not only did I do it on Friday, I did it on 3 different programs on Friday. And my point in saying that is, and I think you heard a lot about this in the earlier presentation, is if you really find a way to engage with it, and you can actually use it to engage with it as well. I have found more success asking it to help me build and develop the things that I need than presuming I understand its language. It has fundamentally, in a short period of time, changed our approach. It has changed our business. It has changed how we allocate our time. And it is absolutely accelerating our investment process and timeline.
What surprised you most about this transformation?
Well, a couple of things. So I just having been a public company guy before, I'm always concerned about compliance, and I'm concerned about the law, and I'm concerned about confidentiality. And one of my, I thought actually very intelligent test cases when we started looking at AI tools and I'm going to say this with all due respect, I come from a tools space, but tools developers are sometimes focused on getting you to a pretty slide or a pretty output on the end, or they're trying to help you organize your thoughts on the front end. And then in the middle, and I think this was briefly discussed, you don't get to see anything that happens. And so one of my test case requirements when we thought about how we were going to use and deploy this technology was, well, how do I audit that? How do I keep a record? How do I keep track of that? And funny enough, the test case was if I ask it a question on a Monday and I ask it a question on a Thursday, the same question, how close are the answers between those 2 days? And the answer is they are not close at all. And that is really unfortunate because I think the enthusiasm of being able to process a tremendous amount of data and read it, be like, wow, I just saved a week's worth of work. You aren't thinking about, well, whose data was it? Where did you ask that question? And what happens if you need to ask that question again 2 days from now? And so we ended up finding a solution, and I think this will be part of the discussion maybe today and certainly going forward, is how is that decision-making process captured? And for us, it was an absolute imperative requirement. And so for us, the process that we're using is it captures all of the decision logic in a JSON format, which I think is just a computer programming format. I can literally take that JSON code and I can put it right back into the query and almost completely recreate where I was with the original ask of the question. And so what surprised me is I think really just the disconnect between what's being developed on the tool side and those very particular, very specific, very confidential use case scenarios that we have and being able to bridge to that.
And just quickly, where does IP fit into this? What is the most important role of IP in this transformed world?
Well, and that's an interesting question. It's going to require a lens. I think, so IP for me, and actually I think it was last year, Bruce, we talked about this. I sat on a similar panel and somebody asked me, what would make you more confident in asking an AI model to answer a question versus not using it? And the answer I gave last year was, I think that what will happen is we as consumers of the technology will naturally have some expectation of where a data set originated, which is being used to answer the question. So I use a very generic example of if I was asking for an 11-year-old kid, my son, who's doing a research project, I may want to use the Encyclopedia Britannica's knowledge or data set, or I may want to use the Discovery Channels or National Geographic's data sets. And so I thought initially IP would be around those that had developed very credible, historical, and very well detailed information that would be available from a data set perspective. And what I'm finding now is as the work gets more specialized, the IP that we see is being able to create it and use it in an environment where we're not necessarily sharing it externally for others to use it.
Great, thanks. Still staying on the theme of AI as a transformation lever, if I could pass the mic on to Tony, contestant number 2. Tony, take us to the in-house perspective and tell us how AI has changed the way that companies, organizations are extracting value from IP.
So I'll probably start a little more generic, a little broader. I mean, we can talk about an IP perspective, but at this point, it's probably about 18 months ago, I was tasked to lead a group, a steering committee on artificial intelligence in the research function at Owens Corning. And the very first thing we did was we of course established a charter, which I'm not necessarily a huge fan of, but it turned out to be very helpful in this case because we took the charter and all those words and KPIs and all things that are very important for measuring, and of course they are, not saying that they're not, but in the end, what we ended up distributing and what became our sort of rallying cry was a cartoon. And the cartoon took the charter columns and made them into cute little diagrams. And the very first one of those was create a culture of knowledge capture. Now, this is not going to be news to anybody because everybody keeps talking about it. The two biggest things you talk about with AI implementation, generally, whether it be personally or whether you're talking about a corporate function, is you got to get your data house in order. Allison mentioned that, absolutely true. But at the same time, you can't ignore the idea that the vast majority of the knowledge that is generated on any given day within any given organization is lost because it is not digitally captured. All right? You're talking, you're in a meeting. The idea, it was revolutionary to me that they finally, our IT organization allowed us in Microsoft Teams to turn on transcripts. All right? Transcripts are tremendous. They are absolutely essential. Just to give you a semi-personal example, but it's absolutely within this business context. One of the very first things I did when I had the opportunity to be able to generate transcripts and then generate an AI summary from those transcripts and to have automatically generated AI action items that I could then keep myself accountable towards, was that I went ahead and I started developing a method by which I could create individual Word documents for each and every one of those meetings. And at the time, I didn't know where I was going to put those files. I didn't have a sufficiently capable system associated with a large language model that I thought was actually going to help me answer questions about the meetings I'd been a part of. Well, some time goes by, I try a few things, I try something, and I hit on a system that actually works really well for me. So today, Tony's Memory Palace has about 375 transcript files, summaries, and action items from nearly every single meeting I've been in at Owens Corning for the last basically 15 months. All right? I now have near perfect recall of everybody I spoke with and what we talked about, and I can use it in a dozen different ways.
And Tony, focus on one of those ways, which is how do you use it to extract value from patterns?
Well, okay, so now that's a great example, and that's a good way to segment. Okay, because the other thing we did, and this is, I certainly appreciate what Allison is saying with small language models. And for a time, I thought that was really the way to go. But there's an extra step to fine tune and create those in the first place. In the meanwhile, what I've started to introduce within Owens Corning, and for each and every single one of our projects, is the idea of a domain model that is specific. And so here's what we do. We find the relevant patents, all right? We get a computer-readable version of those. It might be 100, might be 200, 300. We grab the patents. We go over and we work with our Copyright Clearance Center and with Scopus, and we use Scopus AI for deep research. And we go ahead and we grab 24, 50 journal references and book chapters. Then we go to our technical reports. Owens Corning has a rich history dating back to the early 60s of technical reports that were written by our scientists that we have archived and have now been digitalized and we have available to us. Then we go out and use deep research to create market studies and market trends and the financial implications of the inventions that we want to put together. And then we take these transcripts from all the meetings and all the discussions and everything that everybody is working on and talking about. We put them all together in one repository. And we point a capable LLM that will restrict itself to just the contents that you put in that repository. And then we start asking it, here's a problem I want to solve. Give me some ideas on how I can do it. Okay? Here's an idea I have, run it up against what's already in the collection and tell me how close it is and whether or not I've actually got something novel here or that it's likely to run into certain references that are going to cause it problems. So once you've taken the time, and today it's a bit manual, but in the very near future, you're going to have things called bookshelves and knowledge bases, and there's a version of RAG called a graph RAG, which is a much better way versus a vector RAG. And these ideas of having these collections readily available and able to work with multiple agents and to do parallel processing is really going to change. And that's what we're doing for R&D, to create better products by evaluating more ideas much faster.
Great, thanks. Dan? So from where you are sitting, tell us what you see with how, staying with patents, how AI is affecting what gets invented, how their ideas are being developed, and how they are being refined.
Sure. Well, I've seen AI from conception all the way to filing, and there's been a lot of focus on AI and invention, more on inventorship, and then it's now has to do with litigation, and AI created how could I say the hallucination in AI in certain litigation situations. But I really think the opportunity for AI to follow what you just heard is in the development process, in the research process that Allison referred to. As an example, I teach a number of courses. In our capstone course, well, I start freshman courses, I teach them patent research. Moving up, it gets more and more in depth. In our capstone course, all the teams file provisional patents, but it doesn't start with solving the problem and then trying to find the patent literature that would be prior art. It starts in the beginning with research and trying to find the white space. And I see this as a knowledge rivalry, the existing knowledge versus the new knowledge created that would generate a novel idea that could become a patent if it is enabled. And the quality of work, since we brought this into the system with students that are seniors going out in the industry, is just exploded. The ability to go deep and generate tremendous amount of focused opportunity space, because they can get to that existing knowledge boundary much quicker. We take, and from our patent research, we'll create work files of what we found as far as potential prior art, and then train on that work file to understand the problem and what has been used to solve it in context, and understand where the boundary is. And then I get them to focus on where that problem falls short. Why is it still a problem, right? And it brings that focus into the process that we can really start making some inroads into new knowledge spaces. Now, it doesn't mean it's competitive. As Professor Connolly will tell you, not all knowledge is competitive, and competitive advantage is the foundation of innovation. That ability for them to get into that space to create competitive entrants that will play out is greatly enhanced. We then take that and go right into the provisional patents. I've always taught, and I believe a provisional should be a draft formal application, not just something thrown together, because you don't know how it's going to stand up until there is the litigation, and you don't have a second bite of that apple. And they create their provisionals, and then I have them reviewed by an attorney who's an alum that looks at it. And he just commented to me the other day. He said, "This is an amazing piece of work from the student group. I hope you give them all A's." And I'm going to say I need to raise my bar grading now, because they're approaching that level of sophistication. What does that mean? AI and IP is we're going to have a flood of new patents coming from everywhere, enabled by the researchers, and almost skipping a lot of the legal work at the patent office. It's going to hit, because it's become so easy to develop good work. And I got to put a caveat here: train it on known data sets, not hallucinatory type sets, but going through the process of iteration and testing. There's a vetting, a natural vetting that occurs in that process. To end, I'll say my fear is that this is easy, and if it's not used appropriately, that you're going to be seeing all types of patents going into the office, or patent applications that have never been vetted, that have never gone through the iterative process, that it looks good on paper, but it'll never work in reality. But how are you going to distinguish that? Because have they really been enabled?
Say a little bit more about that, because my next question to you was to invite you to talk about the IP-specific risks of this transformation, and we were just starting that thought process. So what are some of the real risks if you expand in that direction?
I
And
think the risk is
how can we address those risks?
it's a tsunami. You blind the office with all these applications, and how do they sort through the ones that were actually developed and have any competitive advantage and been enabled versus just hallucinations or even wishful thinking, but generated in such a way they look really strong. Yeah. Not I'll be the first one to tell you, not all good design or not all design has any new value. It's combinations maybe of existing knowledge, but is it a new knowledge that has changed that competitive bar? How are we going to distinguish between that at the patent office? You can if it goes into the market and you get the competition of natural selection in the marketplace, but we're talking pre-market here. What's an examiner going to do? Are they going to try to force everybody like they used to create a model to prove it worked? It's going to be a big black hole as far as understanding where reality and hallucination coexist in that situation.
Great.
Can we create the term IP slop for this?
Well, there's always been a lot of IP slop, right? But I don't know that it's a new problem, but I think from a professional standpoint, that skipping the steps of iterative testing and actually having demonstrative data that is evidence-based moving forward, there used to be, I think, a barrier just created by the amount of money it costs to put a patent through. Companies would say, well, show me that we should spend all this money on the patent. That barrier is going away.
Great, thanks. Phil, you were nodding. So what are your thoughts on this issue?
Actually, I have a post-grant consideration that I think is a really illustrative example. So in my lens, I'm looking at IP that's been issued. It is part of a broader portfolio. It already lives and exists in an ecosystem of competitors who are building similar products.
Settled expectations.
Settled expectations. Yes, for now, we'll go with that.
Yeah.
The challenge is, and again, this comes back to the tools, right? So I think as professionals, you really need to be aware of what it is you're asking it. You need to tell it what your expectations are. You need to set those expectations and make sure that there's enough guardrails around your request. So I'm going to use a semiconductor example. If you run a bunch of, let's say you run 100 patents through an AI screener, very specialty language. Patent law has all sorts of nuances. And you get back, let's say, I like these 10 patents. Okay, great. Your initial enthusiasm is like, this is fantastic. I boiled the ocean and I came up with the 10. And then you ask it, how do you get to the confidences on your ability to identify and chart infringement? And it comes back and it tells you, 80% for sure, 90% for sure. And then you go and you look at that. And this is where the delta between someone who may have created the tool versus someone who's trying to use the tool to a really productive outcome. And you realize that what they've done in the analysis of how they get to that 80% or 90% or 95% confidence is they say, well, there were 7 elements in this claim. 6 of the 7, as you dive into it, say, well, obviously this is how semiconductors operate. But the 6th or 7th element says, but you'd have to measure the frequency by which the information is being communicated. And that one specialty thing has now been averaged into the confidence rating rather than assessed individually to determine that confidence
An even bigger
rating.
trap is that the LLM trains on the specification, which doesn't all that information doesn't translate into the claim. So you really needed to assess it based on what claims were allowed, not what was written in the specification, because that'll change that confidence completely. It's a trap. So how I avoid that is we do the research, then we do a claims analysis, and I think a claims analysis is that check and balance to the,
That's right.
what it's being said, because the patent stands on the claims, right? So I think it's akin to the problem when lawyers use AI to generate the case references, but they don't go in and read the cases.
That's right.
And here you just have to do the work, and it comes down to professionalism. Lawyers and people have always had access to data, but have you really taken the rigor to go and look at that data? And I don't think it's a new problem, but it's a problem that's going to raise up because the access to this data is so much faster now.
I think about this, and the way that we manage this is we say yes, maybes, and nos. And with almost 100% of certainty, if something is disqualified as not meeting an infringement or on the merits of something, you can pretty much go with the no, it has been disqualified. On the yeses, I would say we probably have an 80% disqualification rate just on the basis that it was over exuberant in its confidence or in how it was processed. And then the maybes is really where the money is made, because that may be where it hinges on a construction that may impact the vast majority of decisions that, say, have an outstanding element. But you can shift that with the human in the loop and making that sort of determination. And then when we reprocess on that basis, which is your point, you have to have someone going back through it. You get to a confidence level that you can be comfortable with making a decision on.
Hold on. My fear.
Hold on. There's Tony here too. So let's let
Okay.
Tony get a wedge in. And no, my job is to make sure you get a wedge in, Tony, because I have a question for you, which actually segues nicely from what Phil was saying. So he's approaching this from the capital perspective. Tell us about the labor's perspective. How are organizations from where you're sitting deploying AI in the IP space? Are they still experimenting, or have they actually embedded AI in how they think about IP?
You know, Daryl and I have known each other for some time, but we never actually met. And so I just think it's cute that he thinks that I need assistance in interjecting, because I don't. I'm usually pretty upfront about injecting myself where I'm not wanted. Sorry. Anywho, yeah, you know, I started to talk about that with that whole business of culture, okay? And there is no culture that is more resistant to change than the IP team, if we're being quite frank. And, you know, the other one, the one that comes in second is probably doctors, and especially, say, surgeons. But you've already seen that electronic notes and electronic medical records, patient records, and the inclusion in AI in medical diagnosis is slowly moving that particular area in a direction that is likely to be very beneficial for everyone involved. The IP function is not so different. I can tell you that we're actually going through a process right now of trying to decide, and I'm not actually involved with this, okay, per se. I'm adjacent to it, because as IP strategy manager at Owens Corning, I report into our R&D organization. Okay, I'm not connected to our IP organization. When I first started, there was a dotted line between the director of the IP team and myself, which we since did away with. So I'm an R&D guy. That's the hat I'm wearing. But because of my experience and because of my role, I spend a great deal of time with our IP team. So now they're trying to decide. Now, you go back a year, 2 years ago, it was very easy. If you've got a patentability search, you've got a landscape you want to do, you've got anything at all that you want to do, you send it to outside counsel. Outside counsel sends it to a third-party firm, tells them to spend a ridiculously low amount of money and don't spend any amount of time on it. And then they send back the results, and that's what you make your decisions on, which has driven me batshit crazy for the last 2 years. All right?
That's not research, that's covering.
Well, there it is, because, you know, of course, you know, with the bulk, and we're not a litigious organization. Our industry, you know, making residential construction products, we tend not to sue each other. And we're certainly not going to assert, and we don't do a lot of licensing. So while IP is critical and super important in a measure in how we want to be on the Wall Street Journal Innovative Index, you know, things like that. So it's a very interesting situation. But the bottom line is they're now rethinking things. How much do we want to spend with outside counsel? How much can we expect our attorneys to do themselves? How much should the researchers bring to the table before they even file their invention record? What tools do the IP team need? So they're looking at a handful of agentic systems that have basically taken the IP lifecycle all the way back to idea harvesting. That's what they call it now, idea harvesting, which is you have a Slack channel and it's monitoring the Slack channel and it's identifying potentially inventive concepts and then automatically running a prior art search on that. All right. So invention harvesting, the idea generation, the idea evaluation, and then through the whole thing where you've got patent drafting, say, and then you've got support for prep and prosecution, and then you've got at the far end, what can you do with regards to licensing? All right, there are systems out there that do all of it, and they've modularized all of it, and the attorney can just come in and say, today I need to work at this end of that spectrum, and they can go ahead and do that. So that becomes now, what's the question? Do you pay for the system? Do you ask the patent attorneys, the in-house counsel to get more personally involved? What's the role of the outside counsel? What's the role of consultants? So yes, it's having an amazing, an enormous, ground-shaking impact on day-to-day work and how it is they're supposed to get things done.
Thanks. And are you using any new heuristics to filter the wheat from the chaff?
Well, that's one of the funny things that people are finding, and this is this is a little bit of inside baseball, so I'm not going to dwell on it. We can talk about it later. But there's a lot of people who are talking about that. If you take an issue, let's say a simple patentability search, and you give it to 3 different vendors, you end up with getting, let's say, 10 references from each, and only about 10% of all of them together actually overlap between them. Okay? That sounds like a problem. And in a certain capacity, it is absolutely a problem. And so that's beginning to throw some shade. But the bottom line, the reality is, if you also gave it to 3 different human searchers, there's a very high likelihood that you would see a very similar result because of the vastness of the data and the vastness of the way you approach it and the understanding of what the question was in the first place. This all becomes very challenging. Some people I've talked to, and the suggestion I have for this is that, who cares? Run a dozen searches. Think about it from every single answer. Grab 1,000 relevant documents. Don't worry about recall. Recall can be optimized. And now with all the tools we have, getting to something that's more precise and better targeted towards the specific accomplishments you want to have can be done as a second step. Okay, so I think that there's such a thing as a council of LLMs. So you have LLMs that do work, and then you have LLMs that are checking the LLM's work. And they're having a debate and a discussion that you're only partially privy to. And at the end, the consensus is, and there you go, and now as a human in the loop, you get to weigh in as well. So these types of things are happening very much in real time.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to ask Phil a question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for a question before we come back to the discussion. So Phil, same question to you, but again from the capital perspective. How do you look at what's investable, what's not investable? Is there a way that you reliably differentiate the wheat from the chaff?
That's a fantastic question. This is actually the reason why we've engaged with AI tools. So for those that don't know, Sorin is an investment fund. We are a credit fund, which means we're like the Silicon Valley Bank, where we will provide capital to businesses and look at their intellectual property as collateral. The difference between what Sorin does and what Silicon Valley Bank used to do is that my old joke was they would take collateral liens against all the expired patents, and it would always be a joke. You'd call them up and say, "That's really great. They gave you all the expired patents and they kept the ones that are enforceable." So really for us internally is we're not a big group. And so there's always questions about how do you run a pipeline of investment opportunities and which ones get the attention and which ones don't. And the subjectivity I found incredibly frustrating the first 3 years because there's one person in our organization who has the skill and the talent to actually make the determinations on what's investable and whether or not it's going to survive. And the problem with that is you have to manually work to get that person to go into a dark room and disappear for 4 days and come back and tell you whether or not it's going to survive and it's investable or not. And that doesn't work. That's not scalable. And frankly, what I found was in trying to navigate that, is what can I do to make sure that when that person disappears to go do that work, that one, they're not frustrated, they're not under some preconceived notion that this is going to fail, and they're more interested based on the amount of information that I can provide them. And so in our business, that's fundamentally important, because a year ago, a large company would call me and say, Phil, this is something that we're looking at as a strategic mandate. My CEO wants to do this. And I would say, well, that's really great. You need to allocate $500,000, call Boston Consulting Group, have them go do the work. And when you figure out what valuable patents are in your portfolio, call me back. Guess what? They don't call you back. They go somewhere else, right, in that time. So we recognized we needed to be able to interact faster. We needed to be able to interact and get to not just the substance on patents, but to really fragment like what market segments are served. So you may be surprised to learn that our AI tools don't start from patents. They actually start from technology, which is how markets are organized. And patents are like the 7th or 8th step. And we also don't rely on just traditional AI to make the determinations on the patent stuff. We use much more specialized tools that we ask the generalized process to use as empirical input. What I get back, and I'll use this as an example. I think you've made a great example here. We have a test case that we use, which is of 100 patents. We have tracked that against what assets Patent Counsel would think would be the best monetizable. We have input from what the companies think would be the lead assets to be monetized. And then we have our output. And we have now moved our model from 30% overlap on trying to identify those patents to, as of yesterday, about 82% overlap. And that's really impressive when you think about that, because not only have I removed the step where somebody who called me on a relationship basis and says, I need some help, this is a really strategic initiative inside my corporation, and I tell them to go away, but in a matter of a day or two, with a super high degree of confidence, I can get them an answer on where we should be focused and why. And more importantly, when I'm looking at making an investment, think about it as a race, and we're about to put our money on a horse. I also can run that against the entire competitive landscape as a regression model in advance. I can now look at all the horses that are next to mine. I can use patent data, fundamental patent data. Even just using the filing dates, I can get temporal positioning about who was there maybe earlier, which horse is bigger than my horse. Am I making the bet on the right horse? I'm telling you, it has completely changed the way that we look at making investments and the way that we actually provide information back to our prospective counterparties about their patent portfolios. Huge, huge difference.
Great, thanks. A question from the audience?
And there's a lot. We can all tell you all the things that we're doing in our organizations if you're interested afterwards as well.
Okay, we have a question, a hand at the back. Please identify yourself, name and affiliation, please.
Thank you. My name is Masil Malem. I'm with Patent Plus AI. I have a question for Tony. So obviously, as you know, there is a lot of people who have built careers on patent searching, doing it the traditional way, and they're experts, dealing with clients and making decisions out of patent data. And as you've pointed out yourself, that has essentially been automated with AI agents that can do a better job, if not now, definitely a couple of years from now. So what do you envision the new human role to be of these folks who, spent decades doing patent searching? Where is their time better spent moving forward in the future? Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's basically a question about agents and what sort of impact, especially with regards to prior art searching, having a team of agents is going to have on the process. And it's another one of these, and maybe even this is a more controversial response, only slightly. And it's something that I had the good fortune to be in Redmond, Washington. Microsoft had their very first Frontier R&D Summit a few weeks ago. And so there was a group of companies and partners and Microsoft executives that wanted to talk about how agentic workflows were going to change the future of research and development and material discovery in pharmaceuticals and life sciences and any R&D intensive field going forward. It was an amazing conference. And one of the things we talked about was everybody likes human in the loop. Everybody wants human in the loop, okay? But they also recognize that humans in the loop slow things down. And it also becomes a situation where are you too beholden to, are you slowing everything down because you have to insert yourself into the middle of it, okay? That's a big problem with a massively parallel processing supercomputing unit that can go through and call on 18 different agents and go to 15 different connectors for different data sources and run through multiples of different iterations in a couple of hours. Where exactly do you fit the human in on that? Now, but it's still important because the number one item, the number one skill that really supercharges human beings when they're AI augmented is judgment. That's the one thing that we don't have in spades with these existing developments, and that is human judgment. The ability to use our wet matter to be able to think through and speculate about multiple variables and how those impact, and we do it intuitively. It's built into the way that our brains are wired. Which brings up so the idea is, frankly, is that even with a team of agents, and for a scientist, it becomes, well, there's a lot of individual contributors, that's what we call them, and they're very good scientists in and of themselves and on their own. But at the end of the day, the skill that they're probably going to have to acquire most is how do you manage a team of agents? Somebody who's used to being an individual contributor, going into the lab, doing their work, coming up with their own ideas, working by themselves. Now the expectation is going to be, no, you have to work with partners. And those partners in this case aren't necessarily humans. I mean, we even use the idea that, we think of them as a postdoc. We talk about AI assistants all the time as a really smart intern. But for the R&D space, that's a really skilled but inexperienced postdoc, all right? Now you've got 100 of them at your disposal. How do you keep them busy? How do you change the way you do your work and the way that you think as a scientist in order to maximize that type of potential? All right, so it's a big question. But the big question, the actual underlying question is then, but what do you do about getting people that judgment? How do you bring forward the next generation? So as young scientists, how do you encourage people to continue to enter the field? And how do you train them in order to be able to develop that judgment? We were talking about that at the IP Dealmakers Conference as well. There was a big sort of set of questions, and there's a lot that's going on with regards to associates, patent, law firm associates. And that's a whole area that is shrinking right now. And there's a big question of, how do you get an associate to a partner in this new world? And so human judgment is critical, but what are we going to do to continue developing the next generation of that judgment in science?
That's actually a great segue to our final theme this morning. And I'm going to ask the next question to Dan. Talk to us about trust and how on this road ahead, we can build trust between the inventors, the companies, and the AI systems that are being used.
Yeah, well, following on the same theme, I think that we're all, as John Dewey would say, in a quest for certainty in this process. And I think one of the big challenges in we have in the development aspect is to, as you go through the process with your agents and your partners, et cetera, where are you raising that certainty along that process? And quite often, what I've seen in a lot of development work, AI can handle certainty in quantitative areas, objective areas fairly well. But when you get to the qualitative, subjective areas, the human behavior, the human economics, it doesn't pick it up. And your researchers need to have critical thinking. They have to be there at those junctions in order to understand that balance and look for it. I don't know if you can train an agent to understand the endowment effect or loss aversion the way humans are experiencing it. And so raising that certainty requires, as we've fallen back, the professionalism to keep people in that loop so it doesn't go off and down a black hole. I don't know any other way. And I don't know that we're going to get to the singularity where it's going to start happening. There's something uniquely human about us, obviously, from evolutionary spaces. And I don't know that you'll take that critical thinking out of this process. And when you do, you're not going to have any certainty.
Thanks. Phil, talk to us about access to capital and whether the introduction of AI has changed the equation in terms of who gets access to capital and who doesn't in the IP space.
I think, so for and this is again through just the investor's lens, access to capital, especially in a credit model, is fundamentally different than litigation finance. Litigation finance, if you're in the business of litigation finance, you get a phone call that says, I'm mad at company X, I need to sue them, and I don't have enough money. And the answer is, okay, well, show me the patents, tell me what law firm you're hiring, where are you going to file suit, and I'll make a decision to give you the money, and call me in 7 or 8 years and let me know if we won. The difference for what we do as a credit model, if you remove IP just for a second, in a credit model, you think of it as IP-backed lending. And in a traditional context, if you're using your intellectual property as collateral, it's sort of chuckled about on the back end, and it's decided that there's got to be some fire sale value. I may lend you $25 million, but geez, can I sell this for $1 million out the back door if this investment fails? What we have done is fundamentally shifted that to say, well, wouldn't it be better to know what the value of that IP is in the market from a licensing perspective from day one before we invest? And then from that perspective of having the knowledge of which assets and on the merits can underlie an investment, then you can start to apply traditional loan to value metrics. So for example, when we see income events in an investment of ours, these are often licenses and there's a real income amount, it's not the surprise like, wow, I had an expectation that this would be no money and here's $5 or $8 million coming back to service a facility. We're actually in the tens of percentage points off, where we would have said, well, we expected 7 and we got 6.5, or we expected 7 and we got 9 and we were surprised. So what I think AI really has done, and in terms of access to capital, is it really allows us to hone in on the value of that collateral pool, separate and aside from what the business wants to use the proceeds of the investment for, knowing full well that we have a very clear view of how that IP can be used in a fallback position and potentially in a revenue position for the business that we're investing in as well. It's totally changed it.
Thanks. So I'm going to take 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up. Professor Conley, wait for the mic, please.
I'm coming to you.
And name and affiliation.
James Conley from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. I'm across the road from your panelist, Dan, who's my former student. I have a question for Phil. Phil, so you're the financial investor here. And the way that I sort of explain the world of people like you to my students is I use Lincoln's quote, the patent system brings the fuel of interest to the fire
of invention.
Of genius. Okay, so love the title of this panel. And I want to ask you, are these AI tools allowing you in your credit model to earn more money?
Okay, I have to be careful what I say because as an investment fund, we don't disclose a lot about this. But I'm happy to report that in a credit model, a traditional expectation for someone who runs a credit fund is that while it may not perform at its return expectation, the principal investment capital is largely secured by the collateral pool, et cetera. So that is to say, if I'm in litigation finance, just for the group in contrast, I may put $1 out, knowing full well that I may not get my return, nor will I get my dollar back. In a credit world, when I put $1 out, I have to be pretty damn sure that I'm not going to lose my dollar. Okay if I don't get the return. And pleased to report that in the entirety of 5 years of investing through 2 funds, have not had a loss scenario. So again, it really has changed the way that we can model it, have the confidence in it, deploy the right size of capital relative to the risk, and see expected returns, again, fitting into a pre-constructed expectation of what a credit fund needs to operate as. And I would also add, the other thing that it does is it allows us to fit into the timeline of a traditional investment structure where most other IP-based investments just can't. That answer?
Yeah, well, just one little twist on that is if it's a credit model, then you earn an interest rate of sorts, right? Can you get more interest rate with your tools?
Well, yeah, okay, fair point. So again, sort of for those that don't live in the finance space, there's a concept called venture debt, which probably would be the closest equivalent here. And in this experience, you'd have someone who started a company, they've done it twice before, they've sold those businesses, it's been very successful to them. And the VC world or some banks may invest based on that individual's prior contributions and successes, right? There's really nothing really else that underlies that new startup other than this person has done it successfully before. And therefore, they take venture risk. And in that, they get a substantial portion of equity in exchange for that venture risk. Where we're different is very different cost of capital. Our deals are typically in the high teens of percentages to maybe the mid 20s of percentages. We call this PIK interest, so it's not required to be paid like on a monthly basis or quarterly or annual basis. The interest accrues to the principal balance. And then when there's an income event, then it actually satisfies or redeems and retires whatever that accrual of interest is. But yeah, so the interest rates are equivalent or even more extensible than you would see in venture debt, but they're in the 20 to maybe 25% rate. Which, by the way, is still substantially less if you understand that you have a real opportunity and you believe in that opportunity and the patents themselves really support the opportunity for licensing, for example. Even when you're thinking about a 20% interest rate, that's far less than a 3 or 4 times return, first money out, and someone that's going to live in your cap table forever.
We have time for one more question. Does anybody have a question? Wait for the mic, please.
Hi there. A really great panel. Really enjoyed this. I did have a question. How do you think about balancing the incoming amount of data that you're able to obtain from, the various tools that you're using, patent search tools? You made a reference, Tony, I think, to just get thousands of them and kind of take a look at it. How do you balance that desire for more information to try to get the best average result against discoverability long term?
The question, the echo, I can't believe.
The survey's tough.
We're having a hard time. Can you restate it really quick?
Sorry. My question was, how do you balance the desire for maximizing outcome from AI tools against discovery risk long term?
Yeah. Well, I think there's no way to, it's a tool that's going to be there. I think the balance has to be that critical thinking step. Use the tool as much as possible, but you have to have the check and balance there. You just can't let it go. There's too many other variables beyond the performative quantitative variables that the AI is really good at.
Yeah, and I think I understand the question, the way you were asking it, discoverability with regards to a legal perspective. And you alluded to, you brought up the inventor problem. that there was a significant human contribution, and that is something that you're going to have the burden of proof, and discovery is part of that. And it's a great question, and it is something that we continue to struggle with because we for instance, Owens Corning is investing in a patent monitoring system as well, because that's what we think is going to, curated content that is specific to topics. We think that that's very important, whether it's a small language model or whether it's a domain model that only has a small sandbox to work from in any event. But getting that curated content that's really fit for purpose is absolutely essential. So that brings in the question of discoverability and whether or not you're opening yourself up for triple damages because you've seen, this is something you're aware of and you willingly infringed. And then even with inventorship, how are you documenting and then being able to then demonstrate that to the patent office or the courts if it ever gets challenged by an inventorship claim. So I think it's critically important. It's still something that our company, at least, is continuing to work on. We think the benefits outweigh the risks, and we are trying to use traditional methods of staying to the facts. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that a company like Owens Corning is interested in fiberglass insulation. Okay, that's not. I mean, great. We'll be happy to tell you that because it's all over our webpage. And so, yes, walking that fine line and instructing our scientists to use specific language always, and to not say, "Oh, gee whiz, damn it, we're really on top of this one, and they're going to kill us if they ever take us to court." That would be a comment we would suggest they not make. And so, I do think it's just another one of those little nuances that are critically important, and that we're trying to begin incorporating into the process. So we do now actually have AI invention guidelines for trying to document and the types of things you should and shouldn't do per se, and how it is that you should document it. So it's top of mind for our IP team that in this new world, there are going to be new operational procedures, and that we need to be right there in the forefront and making sure our scientists understand that and follow those guidelines.
Thanks. So we have time for a lightning round, but per Bruce's instructions, a really quick lightning round. So we'll start with Phil. We've covered a lot of ground, but there are also things that we talked about that we didn't cover. What is one thought that you want to leave with the audience this morning?
I met a venture capitalist 20 years ago in my career, Steve Gullins. I'll never forget this guy. And he told me that the biggest transitions and shifts in markets are when we learn to speak new languages. And his was life sciences and boiling the ocean and finding all kinds of new life and being able to figure out what that could mean for our future. What I learned, even and just connected a few weeks ago, I was at IPBC in Paris, and it was very telecom focused. And I took away from that while we are all working on understanding and interacting with AI sort of at this base level, and we're starting to learn about agents that can actually do this processing for us.
30 seconds each, guys. The voice from the top speaks.
Our phones themselves and the apps. If you notice the shift from using the internet to using apps on your phone, the next shift with 6G and what is being developed on the standards basis is to allow your phone to use the apps in the background as your pre-designated agents to, in the background, be processing things that you're talking about, searching, looking at, listening to. That is going to be a huge shift. 5 years.
For me, this is pretty easy. Dr. B talked about maybe you live in interesting times. We are seeing a fundamental paradigm shift, sea change, call it whatever you want. Once upon a time, people took inorganic raw materials, mixed them together, and they got something new out. That was science 1.0. Then all of a sudden, we're discovering microscopic life with using microscopes and all the different things that we've learned. And then all of a sudden, that's R&D 2.0. Well, today, we are just embarking on the era of R&D 3.0, where all of the research and development that's going to be done is going to be agentic. And it's going to be done in a cooperation between scientists and massively parallel agentic systems.
I think the the biggest thing is going to be rather than inventors or researchers chasing every car that goes by because it's so easy now, to focus on the real right now problems and keep that focus as your guiding light through this whole process. This is a tool. We just got to learn how to use the tool and raise the certainty it's going there. But it's going to be so much easier to proliferate your ideas. But when you don't follow a real right now problem, it's really doesn't lead you to that competitive space.
Great. Thank you for your questions, and please join me in thanking the panel. Over to you.